Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at histograms whenever you're already given one and looking at some of the information it provides. Now, the last video you watched showed you how to construct a histogram, but now we're going to be looking at interpreting the data and the measures of center, spread, and shape. Before we look at that though, I want to remind you that a histogram looks like a bar graph and it does use bars to represent information, but instead of having categories on the x-axis, we have intervals, ranges, equal ranges of numbers that the bars represent, and it represents the whole data set. So for the 8 to 899 range for photocopies, we know that we have 2 schools represented with this bar. We don't know the exact data points just given the histogram, so on some of the measures we won't be able to calculate them exactly. Let's go ahead and start with the measures of shape here. So whenever we look at the shape of a histogram, that helps us out with some measures of center. Our first example shows us an even data set. Okay, we have the same number of points on both sides, so this is going to be symmetrical. We discussed this before with dot plots. It's very similar to that. Now our other 2 examples don't have a line of symmetry down the center. Most of the data is on one side. So the data can be considered skewed, and it's also not symmetrical. And another word for not symmetrical is asymmetrical. Means the same thing. Means the data is not the same on both sides. And this actually will tell us some information about our measures of center. Since we don't have the exact points for this histogram, we can't find the exact middle for the median. Also, since we don't know the exact data points, we can't add them up and divide by how many points there are, so we cannot calculate the mean. So for these 2 measures of center, we cannot calculate from a histogram. But we can look at the shape of the data, and this can help us. So I'm going to put a star at the bottom and put shape can help us estimate. What that means is when the data is symmetrical, or in this case, it's fairly symmetrical, which means it's almost symmetrical. It has about the same amount of points on both sides. This left interval just has 1 less than the right interval. But this can help us tell that our median and mean are most likely in this center interval. So we can at least narrow it down to make an estimate about the mean and median and that they're close together. Now for the measures of spread, it's very similar. Since we don't know the exact highest point or exact lowest point or the median, we also cannot calculate these 2 from a histogram. But we can make an estimation because we know the range is subtracting the highest value and the lowest value. So we at least know which intervals that we could look at. And we also know it can't be higher than 1,299, and our minimum can't be lower than 800. So we can at least make an estimation with the range. Now, interpretation questions. These are a lot of the questions that you'll be asked about histograms. So my suggestion to you is to treat this like a bar graph as far as interpreting goes. So what that means is I would label these bars. For instance, this first interval, 800 to 899, that has 2 schools represented. So I would label that bar with a 2. The second interval has 5 schools. The middle interval, the third one, has 8. The fourth one has 5. And then the last one has 3. This also can show us that the data is fairly symmetrical. Now, let's go ahead and look at some questions you could possibly be asked. The first question, what is the total number of schools represented? So for the total, that means we need to add up how many schools there are. So that means we would add up 2 plus 5 plus 8 plus 5 plus 3. And that gives us a total of 23 schools. So we can tell how many are represented. Next question. Do more schools make 1,100 to 1,199 photocopies or 1,200 to 1,299 photocopies? Now in this case, it's having us compare two intervals or two bars. So we just want to look at those two. I'm going to go ahead and circle the two intervals that we are comparing. And the question is, do more schools make 1,100 to 1,199 photocopies? And the answer is yes, because we have 5 schools that are in that interval, and we only have 3 schools that are in 1,200 to 1,299. So the answer here is yes. This could also be presented as a true-false statement. Is this statement true or is this statement false? Last question. How many schools make less than 1,000 photocopies? For this one, it's asking about 1,000, so it's not asking about one particular interval. So whenever we look at our intervals, we can see that 1,000 to 1,099 is the center interval. But we're looking for how many schools make less than 1,000. So that means 800 to 899 is less than 1,000, and 900 to 999 is less than 1,000. So we have to add these two intervals, which gives us 7 schools. So whenever you're presented with statements or questions to interpret, just make sure to take it one statement at a time and make sure and label the question or the statement, and also